first thing you said is, "I am no monster." To the contrary, Mr. Harris, you are a monster.
Yeah, I'll see you all in hell, too. Remember that. Every one of you, I'll see you in hell.
This is Caius Veiovis. He is about to be sentenced at Hampton Superior Court. Caius Veiovis, a high-ranking member of the Hells Angels outlaw motorcycle gang, along with other members of the Hells Angels, had brutally murdered 3 Pittsfield men in August 2011. Brace yourself as we delve into the chilling details surrounding this crime, and most importantly, find out what the judge's verdict will be. Caius Veiovis, born Roy Gutfinski Jr., emerged from the shadows of the criminal underworld in the late 1990s, with a reputation for ruthlessness and a penchant for violence. He quickly rose through the ranks of the local gang scene, becoming a feared and respected figure. Veiovis' troubled upbringing, surrounded by violence and crime, set the stage for his descent into darkness. As a young man, he found solace in the camaraderie of gang life, where he honed his skills and embraced a life of crime. But it wasn't long before Veiovis' criminal activities took a sinister turn. He became involved in a series of shocking crimes that would leave the community reeling. In August 2011, Veiovis, along with 2 other men, identified as Adam Lee Hall and David Shalo, kidnapped 3 Pittsfield men, David Glasser, Edward Frampton, and Robert Chadwell, and brutally murdered them. According to reports, one of the men, David Glasser, was to testify against Adam Lee Hall, who was also a high-ranking member of the Hells Angels. To stop him, he was brutally murdered, while the other 2, who were his roommates, were also murdered to eliminate any witnesses to Glasser's murder. All 3 victims were last seen in Glasser and Frampton apartment on August 28, 2011. Almost 2 weeks later, their dismembered bodies were discovered, buried in a trench in Beckett. The impact of Veiovis' participation in these murders extended far beyond the immediate victims. Families were torn apart, forever scarred by the loss of their loved ones. The community rallied together, seeking justice and demanding an end to the reign of terror. The pursuit of this dangerous criminal became a top priority, with investigators leaving no stone unturned in their quest to bring him to justice. Finally, after a lengthy and intense investigation, Veiovis was apprehended. The trial that followed was a spectacle, with the media covering every twist and turn of the proceedings. The courtroom was filled with tension as the prosecution presented their case, painting a vivid picture of Veiovis' crimes and the devastation they caused. The defense, faced with overwhelming evidence, tried to paint a different picture of Veiovis. They argued that he was a product of his environment, a victim of circumstance. They attempted to humanize him, to make the jury see him as more than a cold-blooded criminal with a weird appearance.
The Commonwealth has never been able to find the scene of these killings, and therefore I expect there will be no evidence or testimony connecting Mr. Veiovis to the location or locations where these crimes occurred.
DA Capos called my attorney, Gavin Reardon, and told me he knew I did not kill these men, but that he had in his head I was involved in the disposal of bodies. He offered me conspiracy after the fact, 7 years. I told my lawyer what I've told you and others many times before. My hand was not in this. And I'd rather spend the rest of my life in prison and be able to face myself in the mirror at the end of the day and make that kind of deal.
However, the jury, faced with the weight of the evidence, had no choice but to find Veiovis guilty on multiple counts of murder and other charges.
You upon your oath say the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree. So say you, Mr. Foreperson. Was this the verdict of the jury?
And then came the moment of truth. The judge, with a stern expression, delivered the sentence: 3 consecutive life terms. It was clear that Veiovis had no intention of ever changing his ways or seeking redemption. His reaction to the sentencing only solidified his reputation as a cold-blooded criminal, unrepentant and beyond redemption. The impact of Veiovis' crimes on the community cannot be overstated. The scars left by his reign of terror will forever serve as a reminder of the darkness that can lurk within the human soul. Next, we go to San Diego for the sentencing of the former president of the San Diego chapter of the Hells Angels. In June 2013, Stephen Charles Sanders found himself in the middle of a shocking legal case. It all started with his involvement in a series of kidnappings. Soon he was charged with kidnapping, robbery, solicitation to commit murder, and assault with force likely to cause great bodily injury. Before I delve into the details of this case, let's take a step back and learn a little about Sanders himself. In April 2007, he held the position of president in the San Diego chapter of the infamous Hells Angels biker gang. During a Hells Angels meeting, Sanders made a motion to vote out a member named Nick Neff, putting him in bad standing with the gang. Neff paid a heavy price for his disloyalty. He was attacked and then taken outside, where Sanders personally restrained him. At Sanders' command, another member used a tattoo gun to obliterate Neff's tattoos, a chilling warning not to speak to the police. But the story doesn't end there. Sanders, along with 2 other Hells Angels members, took Neff in his truck to retrieve the title to Neff's motorcycle. Faced with duress, Neff signed over the title, hoping to salvage his life. Then came another sinister turn of events. Sanders and his cohorts escorted Neff back to his own home, where the 2 members entered the premises. Once inside, they callously took valuable possessions, including a television, a Hells Angels calendar, and personal photographs of the gang's members. Fast forward to May 2010, and we discover another victim of Sanders' violent tendencies. Preston James, an unfortunate employee at a motorcycle shop owned by Sanders' wife, found himself in a nightmare. Sanders, accompanied by 2 other Hells Angels members, asked for James's help loading tables and chairs into a truck. Little did James know this innocuous task would quickly turn into a living nightmare. Curtis Nielsen, Sanders' son, and Sanders himself beat up James. Sanders then instructed his son and Nielsen to force James into Shane's truck. Their malicious intentions became clear as Sanders revealed their plan to steal James's motorcycle. To ensure compliance, Sanders' gang took James's cell phone and knife. Soon after, Sanders and his accomplice, Mike Ottinger, arrived in Sanders' own truck and entered James's home. They came out with even more items: a gun belonging to James, a firearm belonging to his roommate, and various possessions adorned with Hells Angels insignias. But soon enough, the law caught up with him.
I'm in here for multiple cases. I'm in here for armed robbery with a gang enhancement. I'm in here for assaults. I'm in here for now there's so many cases.
The reactions of the defense, prosecution, and the judge during the trial were a mix of outrage and determination to see justice served. San Diego County District Attorney Bonnie Dumanis said Sanders wanted to have witnesses and law enforcement officers killed. Prosecutors also said he tried to kill witnesses and investigators that had connection to a pending kidnapping and torture case against him. He was later convicted of solicitation to commit murder and then pled guilty to charges of assault before the case could go to trial. Sanders' plea bargain, which included a stipulated sentence and a waiver of the right to appeal, left little room for leniency. In the end, the court pronounced its decision. Sanders was sentenced to 25 years in prison. However, reacting to his sentence, Sanders kept saying he was pressured to enter a guilty plea because of fear of what the trial could hold. In fact, he said he didn't commit the crimes and the DA's office targeted him and even fabricated evidence against him.
Yeah, I was definitely targeted by the law enforcement agents. These law enforcement officers are just flat out obsessed with trying to put another Hells Angel in jail.
This is Jonathan Nelson.
Jonathan Nelson, a.k.a. John, 46, of Santa Rosa.
Nelson is one of the 3 members of the Sonoma County charter of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club. He has been found guilty of murder and aid of racketeering. The 9-week trial before United States District Judge Edward M. Chen concluded that Jonathan Nelson, also known as John, Brian Wayne Wendt, and Russell Taylor Ott, also known as Rusty, were involved in a criminal enterprise that engaged in a wide range of violent crimes, including murder, assault, robbery, extortion, and witness intimidation. U.S. Attorney Stephanie M. Hines stated that the verdicts resulted from a lengthy, intensive investigation and warned other similar criminal businesses that such violent activities would not be tolerated. Special Agent in Charge Sean Reagan of the Federal Bureau of Investigation added that the guilty finding was made possible by the important skills and resources offered by numerous agency partners, including the California Highway Patrol and Santa Rosa Police Department. The trial focused on the murder of former Hells Angels Sonoma County member Joel Silva, which the prosecution alleged was orchestrated by Nelson, Wendt, and Ott. Silva was causing issues for HASC for various reasons. The defendants believed he needed to be killed. Nelson, who was leading the HASC then, plans to have Silva killed in Fresno with Ott, long-serving member who was friendly with Silva's family. Ott transported Silva to Fresno, where Wendt shot him in the head at the Fresno Hells Angels clubhouse. Silva's body was then burned.
6 suspects were arrested at the Wagon Wheel Saloon in Santa Rosa on Saturday, one of several raids across the country. One of the bikers who was indicted yesterday is now on the run. Law enforcement are searching for 36-year-old Russell Lyles Jr.
The trial's evidence also demonstrated HASC's involvement in witness intimidation, extortion, drug trafficking, and robbery. Witnesses claims the HASC had a reputation for threatening anyone who reported their activity to the authorities. Additionally, evidence showed that the defendants threatened the lives of witnesses and their families to dissuade them from cooperating with law enforcement. Victory found all 3 defendants guilty of participating in a conspiracy involving racketeer-influenced, corrupt organizations, and a conspiracy to murder in furtherance of racketeering. Nelson was also found guilty of using or possessing a firearm in connection with a violent offense, an assault with a dangerous weapon, and aid of racketeering. The 3 Hells Angels members were sentenced to mandatory life terms in jail, restitution, fines, and forfeitures. They remained unmoved, even after their fate was communicated to them. The crime Nelson and his group committed, although horrific, pales in the face of Maurice Boucher. This is Maurice Boucher. He is a former leader of the Hells Angels gang in Quebec. This man has been making headlines all his life for murder, already serving a life sentence for the brutal murders of 2 correctional officers in 1997. Boucher was also handed an additional 10-year prison term for his involvement in a murder conspiracy. In the 1990s, there was an intense war between the Hells Angels and Rock Machine. During that period, he ordered the killing of 2 correctional officers, Pierre Rondeau and Diane Levine, at random. His reason was to make the crime so terrible, the police wouldn't make bikers informants. He was charged and arrested for murder, both attempted and in the first degree. But in 1998, a jury acquitted him. However, an appeal court dismissed the acquittal and he was arrested again. One reason was that the jury in the former trial was threatened. This time around, he was convicted, ironically with the help of a police informer. But the court proceedings weren't without drama. The prosecuting attorney, France Charbonneau, herself a no-nonsense woman, received death threats. The key witness was Stephen Gang, who told the court that Boucher told him to carry out the murder. He had cut a deal with the prosecution, who offered him 7 years. But the biggest evidence against Boucher was financial records that showed that in just 8 months in 2000, the Nomads made $111.5 million in Quebec. After the jury deliberated for 11 days, Boucher was found guilty of 1 count of attempted murder and 2 counts of first-degree murder. He immediately received 2 life sentences. However, Boucher showed no emotion besides a slight pursing of his lips. He was eventually detained in the only super maximum security prison in Canada. But somehow that didn't deter him from still committing crimes in prison, using his daughter Alexandra Mongeau as a proxy for organized crime in Montreal. He even allegedly ordered the killing of Renaud Desjardins, even though he knew he was being recorded, he said. In the affairs of the mafia, okay, if he comes here, I know someone who can kill him if he wants. Because to me, Desjardins will be brought here. If he comes here, we can kill him. He then made a stabbing gesture with his hands. The plan, however, was foiled, and Boucher was arrested in his prison cell. He was charged again with conspiracy to commit murder. To the biggest surprise of everyone during the trial, he immediately pled guilty and was charged with an extra 10 years. But honestly, it didn't seem like he cared. When Judge Eric Downs asked him to confirm his guilty plea to the conspiracy charge, Boucher was forced to raise his voice and exclaim, "Guilty!" When given the opportunity to address the court, Boucher chose to remain silent, uttering only the words, "All is good." Quebec's Superior Court Judge Eric Downs, however, held a different perspective, described Boucher as someone lacking any prospects of rehabilitation, and noted that aside from his guilty plea, there were no significant mitigating factors in the case. It was as if Boucher enjoyed the thrill of people thinking he was a murderer and didn't even try to hide it. Photographer John Mahoney managed to capture a defining image of Boucher during the funeral of murdered Nomads member Norman Biff Hamill. The photograph displaying Boucher flashing a peace sign symbolizes his brazen attitude in the face of violent circumstances. Boucher's life would be a lesson to other bikers to abide by the law. That lesson was lost on Zayn Wallace. Next, we'll go down to New Zealand for the sentencing of Zayn Wallace. And trust me, you're in for a ride. In a tragic case that shook the community, Zayn Wallace, a prospect of the Hells Angels gang, was facing a range of charges, including murder, 4 charges of threatening grievous bodily harm, 3 charges of assault with intent to injure, 2 of threatening to kill, and 1 each of injuries with intent to injure, assault, and demands with menace. The victim, Jasmine Wilson, sadly passed away in Wellington Hospital on August 2nd, 2019. 2019 after being left severely injured and unconscious at Wanganui Hospital's emergency department several days earlier. What's even more painful was that Wallace had a history of abuse towards Wilson. He had beaten her months before she died. He had a history of physical abuse against his past partners.
One of the most telling things about Jasmine's case was the fact that she had injuries upon injuries. So she had fractured ribs that were 4 weeks old, 2 weeks old, fresh. It wasn't that someone snapped and did something and she died as a result of it. It was that a person made the conscious decision to beat her, and then to beat her again, and then to beat her again, and then to beat her again.
Before her death, when he spent time in prison for an unrelated crime, he threatened her. He said he was going to slap, kick, bash, and kill Wilson. He even said he was going to put her in the ground and described how he'd kill her in detail.
Those threats included your saying, "I'm going to kick your head in when I get out," that Ms. Wilson better be the best girlfriend or she will be dead, and that she'll better love you or you will get out and stomp her. You then described various explicit and gruesome ways in which you would kill her, and that you would kill Ms. Wilson's sister, her child, and her whole family.
Tragically, his words came to pass. On July 30th, 2019, he hit her in the head several times and attacked her the next day, hitting her head twice in the wall, which caused her to faint.
I know that he slammed her so hard into a wall or something that it gave her 3 brain bleeds immediately, and that she was left immediately unconscious.
This was when he called his dad for help. The gravity of the situation escalated as it came to light that not only Zayn Wallace, but also his father, Mother Leanne, and sister Stevie Lee Wallace had been convicted and sentenced for attempting to pervert the course of justice in relation to Wilson's death. But that's not all. Stevie Lee Wallace, along with the others, deliberately misled hospital staff and law enforcement by providing multiple accounts of how Wilson sustained her injuries, confusing the investigation. During the court proceedings, 11 victim impact statements were presented, each painting a vivid picture of Wilson's remarkable character, a kind, talented, and radiant individual who brightened every room she entered. Brenda O'Shea, Wilson's mother, described her daughter as deeply connected to her Whanoteo Māori and the arts. Wilson was a loving sibling, a kapa haka tutor, and an ever-smiling jokester.
She's a jokester. She's funny as, but she's always been dependable, reliable. The big sister.
Her sister, Georgia O'Shea, embraced the field of makeup artistry due to Wilson's encouragement. Tragically, Georgia had to use her skills to try to reconstruct her sister's face after her untimely demise. Forever haunted by the image of her once vibrant sibling, one cannot imagine the pain she felt doing that. Mary Mitchell, Wilson's aunt, characterized Zayn Wallace as a deceiver, cloaked in innocence, forever tainted by the blood on his hands. According to Mitchell, Wilson likely endured his abuses out of fear for her family's safety. Chris Wilson, Wilson's father, expressed that no words he could utter would change Zayn Wallace.
He's going to do however long he's going to do in jail, and is he going to come out a better person? Is he going to become a safe person, a productive member of society? Probably not. He's probably going to come out more angrier than when he went in.
Instead, he appealed to the court to impose a significant prison sentence, allowing the correctional system to address the brokenness within Wallace. The prosecutor, Chris Wilkinson Smith, referred to the murder as a horrific tragedy. Compounded by the recent loss of Wilson's son's father, the defense, Debbie Goodlett, acknowledged Wallace's awareness that he would face a life sentence, either lifelong imprisonment or parole. She said he was committed to addressing the underlying issues that fueled his violent tendencies. But was that enough? Justice Francis Cook took into account Zayn Wallace's tumultuous background, marked by cultural alienation, deprivation, violence, and substance abuse. Having been introduced to drugs at a young age, Wallace's subsequent criminal activities led him down a destructive path. However, in the eyes of the law, a murderer is a murderer, regardless of the socio-economic factors in their past. The court proceedings at the High Court in Wanganui took a tumultuous turn when tensions between the families erupted, requiring extra security to maintain order in the courtroom. Several members of Wilson's family told Wallace to burn in hell. Wallace eventually pleaded guilty to the murder charge on the day his retrial was scheduled to commence, in the High Court at Wanganui on July 25, 2022, just before the jury was selected. Prior to that, he had already pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including threatening grievous bodily harm, assault with intent to injure, threatening to kill, and other offenses involving assault and intimidation.
For the murder of Jasmine Wilson, I sentence you to life imprisonment with a minimum period of imprisonment of 15 and a half years. Taken down.
Ultimately, Wallace received a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months.
He deserves more. Yeah, he deserves more. He definitely does.
Surprisingly, Wallace accepted the sentence with no issues, as noted by his defense attorney. This is Joseph Lancia. He was the president of the Hells Angels biker gang in Rhode Island. The 30-year-old Lancia is facing attempted murder charges after he fired a gun at a truck that was driven by Richard Starnino. Starnino, once considered a prospect for joining the Hells Angels, was engaged in an ongoing dispute with Lancia. Authorities said no one was injured in the incident, but the situation could have been far worse.
The bullet struck the passenger side of the vehicle. No one was injured. It should be noted that there were children in the area at that time, and there is a school across the street from the location of this shooting.
Astonishingly, Starnino not only survived, but he kept on driving and finished his deliveries. After the incident, a massive raid was conducted at the Hells Angels headquarters.
Anyone inside 161 Message Street? This is the state police. Come out with your hands up. Do it now.
Some gang members were arrested and taken into custody. Lancia, too, was arrested. However, as part of a plea agreement, the more severe charges of attempted murder were dropped. Instead, Lancia pleaded no contest to felony assault and battery.
30-year-old Joseph Lancia changed his plea from not guilty to no contest.
At his sentencing, several members of Hells Angels came in full support for their president. Lancia was given a chance to speak, which he refused.
Is there anything that you would like to say, sir?
Nothing.
However, Judge Kirsten Rogers had some words for Lancia.
Should you not appear in a timely manner, and I'm talking 5 minutes late, or if there are any violations of your release.
She also ordered him to stay away from the victim.
There is a no contact order for the protection of Richard Starnino for the duration of 8 years.
Eventually, it was time for Lancia to learn his fate.
A 5-year full sentence, all of which is to be served at the ACI.
Lancia was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison, plus 10 years of probation.